Hi and welcome back to the Mum Drum. Hopefully you caught the last episodes with Ev and Ro, who chatted with us about the challenges and joys of juggling parenting and work.
Today's interview is a follow-up with Dr. Sarah Cotton and Justine, both organisational psychologists and co-founders of Transitioning Well. Sarah and Justine are here to chat to us today about the challenges that mums typically face throughout this journey and some tips for a smooth transition.
Sarah, Justine, welcome to the Mum Drum. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
No, thank you. Now, you've built a business out of supporting people through major life transitions. How do you describe a transition?
Wow.
When it comes to becoming a parent, how would you describe that?
Yeah, look, I think with all transitions, there's such a familiar flavour to all transitions. But I think we see it at the heart of that transition to becoming a parent. And I think becoming a parent is one of those most significant transitions that any human being will go through. But to answer your question, I think it is really just navigating to your new normal. You know, we go, in this case, Nicole, as you said, we go from being a working person and then what all that brings, and then you go to becoming, in this case, in the podcast today, or what we're talking about, the juggle, to becoming a working person. So it's that transition's a really significant one, and it does take time to find your new normal.
And your business is Transitioning Well. So tell us about Transitioning Well, how it came about, why you started it.
Go for it, Jess.
I think we got really lucky. We actually were introduced by someone that we knew in common, having never met, and sat down together. We had very young kids at the time. I think you were pregnant with your last child, and Sarah just said, we need to start a business in this space, and I just looked at her and said, let's do that. And that was it. Literally, we had never met. So it's really...
So what led you to say we need to start a business? What was the need?
Well, I think it was twofold, wasn't it, Just? It was professionally, we'd seen the need. You know, we were both psychologists working in corporate Australia, and there was no one supporting working parents, or no one supporting organisations to support their working parents. There was a real gap there around supporting transitions, those moments of truth for people, and then personally for us too, wasn't it, Jess?
Well, we'd both lived through it. I think I was, my third child at the time was about 1, and having transitioned back to work in between each one and Sarah too, and we just thought there's nothing out there to support this, and this is such a need, and we can go and make a difference in this space.
So what were your major challenges, Justine, in the transition? That thought we need help with this.
Yeah. Look, I think it was just the juggle with me. So my husband works incredibly long hours and was even then, and did a lot of night shifts at the time. And I was really lucky that I had a flexible employer, which was unusual. So it was kind of like I stopped and I thought, well, without that, I couldn't have done this. And then you start talking to all your friends or colleagues and you realise, well, that's not the norm out there and all these women. So it was more of I'd struggle, but I realised that I had help. And looking around, I was like, there's got to be more we can do to help others. Yeah.
And what about for you, Sarah? What was the impetus for you from your experience?
Yeah, well, I suffered terribly with perinatal mental health after the birth of my first child. So for me, it was a really personal piece, and I was so impacted, and it took me a long time to get help. And so I just wanted to, if I can, Justin, my motto for Transitioning Well has always been, if we can help one mum or dad or one person going through transition who doesn't have to go through the pain that, you know, certainly I experienced, that's going to be worth it all.
Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that struggle for you?
Sure. I think, you know, for me it was the trauma of the birth that was the catalyst that led into my perinatal mental health. And I think, you know, for many of us as human beings, I guess it takes some time to realise sometimes that you're not okay. Yeah. And for me, it took a long time. It wasn't until my husband looked at me at one tea time and he said, "You're not okay. And you need to go and get some help." And I think, you know, I think there's a tendency, I should say, to put it down. Oh, it's just parenthood. I'm just tired. And that's what I kept thinking. I'm just really tired. I'll get better. Yeah, this is not really happening to me. And obviously, as psychologists, we'd read about it. So I'd read about it, and when I identified it in myself, I just thought, well, it can't be me.
It'll be someone else.
And it was absolutely me.
Yeah. Wow, that must just bring so much to your work, and both of your experiences, very different experiences, but that must just bring so much to the essence of what your work is all about and what your organisation stands for as well.
So based on your
personal experiences that you were both just talking about, what's the role of work and the work identity in that space to support mums going through those sorts of things?
Yeah. I think that was the biggest thing that in the role of work, both with the organisational background that we have, Sarah being an organisational psychologist and myself organisationally trained, we really felt that this is a holistic problem. And so, there were organisations starting to talk about postnatal depression and that sort of stuff 7 years ago. It certainly wasn't what it is now, but not within the organisation. And the way we saw it was so much of your life is spent at work, and so much of this is how you navigate both. There's got to be some impetus on making this a workplace problem, or a workplace, I should say, is something that the workplace can do something about it. It's got the onus can't be on the individual only anymore. The organisation has to have the responsibility.
I think just to build on what you're saying, Just, I think historically it was always left to the individual. This is your personal transition, so good luck to you. You go and navigate that how best you can, and the workplace never really played a part. But what we now know is that the workplace's role in supporting transition is absolutely critical, and some of the new reports that are coming out, it's so nice for us because it just validates, why we built Transitioning Well, is all the new research is showing this work-life interface is this incredibly critical part of supporting people and helping to mitigate things like burnout, mental health, all of those things that we've been trying to prevent for years in the workplace. The literature's saying, well, this work-life interface is a really good place to be doing some really meaningful support for your people, and it's good for the person, but it's also incredibly good for business.
So of course it's going to, it makes sense for the workplace to obviously look after their staff, but it must make good economic sense too.
Absolutely.
Surely. So what are some of the costs to workplaces if they don't really take this forward and support new parents?
Well, there's many, isn't there, Just?
Yeah, you can talk about the report. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
well, there's many. I think the perinatal alone, Nicole, the work that you've done with PwC is an incredibly strong report that shows that if workplaces don't actually pick up if someone's suffering from even just postnatal depression, we're not even talking about anxiety here, we're just talking about postnatal depression, the costs are enormous, aren't they?
That's
just
right.
remind me, Nicole, what were they? They were quite
well, look,
high, weren't
it
they?
was amongst the biggest costs of untreated. And as you just said, Sarah, a lot of people don't know what to put it down to when they are experiencing anxiety or depression during pregnancy and in the postnatal period. So they often think it will pass on its own. It's just part of having a baby. It's just part of pregnancy. So of course this then impacts on return to work, productivity at work. So it's costing workplaces. And the PwC report showed that was one of the biggest cost areas. But there's also other costs to areas around construction, safety. Tell us a little bit about that. That's really an area that you've really focused on, Sarah.
And it's interesting, I remember I watched the interview that Ro did, one of your interviews, and she talked about the level of fatigue that new parents encounter. And it's a very real issue, and I think it's been a really unspoken safety risk in the workplace. If we just take one of them, there was some research done by an Australian researcher actually that showed just for fathers alone, so this is not women, this is just fathers in that period post having a baby, they're 36% more likely to have an accident or a near miss at work, and 26% more likely to have a near miss on the road to or from work. These are really significant statistics, and that's just one element. We could talk all day, Nicole, about the risks to business and the foreseeable risks. That we need to, it's not that we think that there's some risks, we know that there's some risk, and the organisations really need to address them and support their people in them.
Are they forthcoming, organisations? Are they easy to get on board? And once you have them on board, are they really willing to go with it?
Yeah. I'll never forget, Sarah, when we first met, just when you said to me, perinatal mental health will be where mental health is within the workplace in the next 5 to 7 years. And I really feel like that's what it took. They definitely, it's been a journey for us, and not always easy getting organisations on board, but I'd say more and more we are seeing organisations saying, you know what, we're willing to do something about this.
Well, I think the great example would be when we first founded, we'd go into meetings, right? I think people thought we were a bit mad. They're like, we've got an EAP, why would we need your services? Come on, we've got an EAP, Now we have people knocking on our door saying, conscious companies, saying we now understand the benefits of supporting people in transition, and we'd love to work with you. So there's been a real shift.
And so what are the key elements about the different there's different stages or phases in the transitions, as we've heard about from the people's experiences this morning. So what are the key aspects, and what are the obviously what your products really focus on, and how can we look at what advice viewers can take today about what those key points are?
I think it might be helpful maybe to divide it into the 3 phases and talk about, you know, what are some of the challenges and how the support can assist.
Yeah, and maybe imagine sharing what the experience would be like for a woman going through this with you.
Or a man. Let's have a look at men as well.
We're getting more and more men participating and wanting the support, which is really encouraging, and workplaces wanting their men to access the services as well, which is really encouraging. So maybe if we look at the preparing for leave phase, obviously giving people a heads up on what the transition looks like and having that realistic orientation is probably the critical piece, isn't it, and getting them to, I say, get out of automatic pilot, because they're often so busy. You know, you heard in the interviews with Ro and Ev, you know, often you're just so busy preparing for leave, and you're managing the pregnancy, and there's so much going on, particularly if it's the second child and you're managing, you know, another child as well. People don't often create a lot of space to prepare for both leaving work well and actually moving into parenthood with some heads up and that opportunity and space to prepare. So I think the preparation is really important.
Absolutely.
What else, Jess?
And what we know is if you prepare well to transition out, that you will transition back in a more smoother fashion. So we're really about set yourself up well at the beginning, because it helps that whole process. And also, I mean, we know this transition to be, if you set yourself up well for the parental leave transition, it sets you up for all the other transitions to come. So particularly where I think it was, Ro was talking about her child starting prep. You know, it's about what have I taken from that toolkit around that original transition that can help me in transitions to come. So
typically, what do you do to help them set up? And what are kind of barriers or struggles that those women bring to you in that phase?
Yeah, well, I think there's many very, very real struggles. I think, you know, Evan, Ro have talked about many of them. A lot of morning sickness, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of uncertainty about roles upon return, just juggling that whole identity shift and preparing for motherhood. What we do with them is we have quite structured support, and it's quite... the thing I love about what we do is it's almost like bringing the village to them, you know, so rather than people feeling as if they're the only one that's going through that, and you may have heard that in the interviews, you know, I realised I wasn't alone, I realised it wasn't just me who was feeling this way, and I think that's the beauty of transition support, is that people realise that there's a very familiar flavour to transition, and as humans we're pretty consistent through transition, and it's so important when people understand what that looks like, because that can really, you know, support them and being kinder on themselves through that. So our support really is in that first phase is just normalising and giving them some structure when things often feel a bit out of control. Here's like we do some action planning with them to think about their handover plans, and so lots of really practical tools.
Yeah, they're actually provided with the structure, as Sarah said, with tools that they can use with their manager to make that smoother from the professional side and the personal side. So we really deal with both to say, how do you hand over well at work so I can leave well? What do I need to think about that I can use at home to prepare me well? So, and being psychologists, we use an assessment where we actually look at, well, what is going on for you in this? You know, where do you have a village? If not, how do you create that? What are your supports? What's your situation around that? So
putting those strategies in place, and then the next stage of the transition. So that's preparing for leave, and then what comes next, and what
that's the during leave, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think Ro and Ev gave us so many great examples, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
I think
so
keeping in touch got the Guernsey, didn't it?
It sure did.
Yeah, really encourage them how to keep in touch well, and also just personally checking in that they're okay during leave is a big part for us. So using the iCope, as I'm sure that most people hopefully have heard about, that if they need that mental support, that's always an option. We really, the whole foundation of our business is being psychologists. We're very, it's a very big part of our belief that we can make a difference. All our consultants are registered psychologists around that, so we really feel we have the background to be able to at least identify if there are some perinatal issues going on, to be able to send them in the right direction, to certainly refer on in that space.
Because a lot of women will go on leave and things will really change for them dramatically. Like they might not want to go back to their old role or in the capacity or to that job, or
Back
they
to
might
work
be
at all.
struggling back to work at all. You know, so Ro and
Yeah.
Ev both very driven, ambitious, successful women. It's different though for everyone.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of maybe when things haven't gone so to plan?
Yeah, I think that's just such an important part that you make, Amy. It's different for everyone, and I think what we find at Transitioning Well is it's about helping people make that conscious choice about what's right for them and their family, and that's okay. You know, but it is about making conscious choice and not being caught up in other people's expectations, whereby you're not having that ability to make that choice that's right for you. So I think that to be honest, that's the critical piece, because you're right, some women and men choose very different pathways to what we saw with Ro and Ev, and that's okay.
But it doesn't always feel okay for them, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. And that's why the Keep in Touch, the way we set it up, we always say it's going to change. So communication around this, having that open conversation, that open dialogue is fine, and expect that to change. Yeah, and for some women it's, I want to disconnect completely. We have a number of women who are like this. I've been waiting for this career break. I've been trying to have this baby for a long time, and now it's come, and you know what? I actually don't care what goes on at work, and I'm okay with out of sight, out of mind. And we'll deal with that when and if I come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Priorities, everything changes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it's working out what's right for you.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't know how
You
you're going to
don't know.
feel
Absolutely.
until you've actually had the baby.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's complications. You know, I think Ev's a great example of that. You know, when things went wrong with Rose, you know, you just don't know until you move into that next phase. So I think you just, there's a great quote that we always use is plan A, always have a plan B. So good old Nancy Slosberg's quote. It's so true, because sometimes you actually need a plan C, D, E and F. G, H.
So obviously the keeping in touch is very important in that phase too. What about then returning to work? What are some of the challenges that you guys see all the time, and how organisations can support that?
Sorry, can we just go back to the keeping in touch? Sorry, great question. But I just, because I've met so many women that go on leave, and if they've left not in a great space with their workplace, then they almost don't keep in touch because they don't feel comfortable, they don't feel supported, they just don't want to because they're a bit angry. Can you just give us the kind of core of why that's so important, and how women can maybe do that even if they are feeling like they don't want to, or that it hasn't been set up well for them?
I think one of the biggest things that we've always said is it's that sense of not mattering, that feeling of, you know, I went away and I didn't matter. So around that would be, well, how can I set this up so I do still matter? Everybody likes to feel valued, whether you want to stay connected or not. The basis of the keep in touch as well, I still want to feel valued. And for those that haven't set that up, often it's, and Sarah will always say, don't let them see this on LinkedIn, don't let them see a restructure change on LinkedIn, and I can't tell you how often that happens. So it's about just, you know, saying, well, this is what I do want from my manager, but he's not a mind reader or she's not a mind reader. How am I going to say to them, this is actually what might help when I'm on leave? Is it that they put something in their diary once a month to just reach out and say, how are you? There's not much to tell you, but just thought I'd check in.
But I think that speaks, Amy, to an earlier point, which is helping people to prepare well for leave. So I think if, like just what you said before, Just, if you can actually do that piece well, then you set people up in a much better place to want to stay connected with the business. We can't probably emphasise enough that preparing for leave phase to help mitigate some of the things I think that you were alluding to there, and leaving on a bad note, and that legacy of that stays with people and really lasts, and can make a big impact upon not only during leave but wanting to come back or not wanting to come back.
Absolutely. So sorry. So then the coming back part.
What are the biggest challenges that you guys see?
Well, I reckon Ev and Ro, they've summarised pretty well to the big ones, I think. So confidence, dipping confidence is a big one.
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome.
What's that? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Go for it.
I think when you're away from work, and all the, a lot of the general research will show that when anyone's away from work, one of the things that's most impacted is your confidence.
Yeah.
And so we certainly see that in this space, and sometimes it really manifests itself as feeling like you're the imposter.
Right.
So
I
you're
think
back.
Ro even used those words.
I think she
Yeah.
did,
Yeah.
Just that sense of when am I going to be found out
Yeah.
that I actually can't do this gig?
I'm not 100% on the
job.
Never had that experience.
No, I mean I'm sure we can all identify.
Of course.
And they're just waiting for someone to find them out, and I think it just becomes even more highlighted when you go through that parental leave and return to work. That dip in confidence, and it was interesting. Rose said even her partner experienced that.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting observation.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show that whoever it is, man, woman,
Yeah.
when people have time away from work, it can really have an impact on that confidence. So that's certainly one big challenge that we see, and that fitness for work too, Just, that you always speak about as well.
Yeah, that leads me on to that. I think it's people expect you to come back as if you're the same. And we know you're not the same. You might look the same on the outside, but you're not the same person.
Yeah.
What I like to say to a lot of my clients is I don't like comparing pregnancy to an injury, because it's certainly not. But when you injure yourself at work, whether it be a psychological or a physical injury, you get a return to work coordinator, you get light duties, you get ramped up days, you get a lot of attention based on to make sure that you're okay. Pregnancy is the parental leave inherently in Australia is a long time away from work, specifically for women, the average being 8 months, which is a lot longer than other places in the world. That's a long time away from a workplace to come back and expect to just be there as if nothing's happened.
Yeah.
And what we often hear is it's worse than starting a new job, because there's no reinduction. They expect you to just know things. Often the systems changed, the managers changed, the teams changed. The name of the company might be the same, and that's about it.
And then you don't even know what your role in that
Correct.
changed environment is,
Yeah.
or might look
And
like.
you may not have a desk
Yep.
or a
Yeah,
computer.
they often don't
Oh,
expect. What are you doing here? Oh,
I work
you're
here.
back.
Yeah. Wow.
So these are really real challenges.
Yeah. So what's your advice to women or dads struggling with confidence issues? And does it impact their work? And is that a real concern as well?
Yeah, I think it does. The thought that's just come to my mind is I think we have to be very careful of not just putting all this on the individual. I think I just want to bring back the importance of the workplace here as well, because there's so much that the workplaces can be doing to help support this transition, to help mitigate things like that dip in confidence and that work return fitness and all of those things. So I just want to just make sure
definitely.
we don't forget that.
No, I mean, I think that's the basis of why we believe the organisation so strongly needs to take a part in this, because a lot of that is as a result of the organisation not doing their part.
And even things like just the manager understanding the needs of their individual employee and maybe having check-ins more regularly. So I know for many of the people we work with, they often doubt their performance, or they're wanting to get maybe a bit more feedback in those early days to help sort of give them some evidence around their confidence. So just understanding, I think, the role of the manager in supporting transition is really important, because it's not rocket science.
No. Okay.
It was really interesting with the interviews we did earlier today around how often they talked about what they expected and what the reality was, and how that ended up manifesting. So what can managers do? I think the other thing that was really interesting is they said having a manager who'd had a child would be very different, and even them as managers, they were very different when they'd had it. They had this new appreciation, this new understanding. Do you see clients talking about, well, my manager's not going to get it because he hasn't had kids or she hasn't had kids, and is that I mean, that was something that really came through strongly for me today, was it makes a big difference when you've been there.
To get it. Although, we've seen managers who don't have children who have been the most amazing managers. So again, it's really individual.
They're educated.
They are,
aren't
yes.
they?
Yes, or managers who do have children, and a lot of the time we see some female managers who've been travelled this path before us, kids are slightly older, and had to do it alone because inherently years ago this was not seen as a workplace, and who say, well, yeah, you know, I did it. I did
I
it.
managed.
It's just part of it.
Yeah.
So why should they
so
have
we
this
do
support?
see that.
Yeah.
We do see that too.
Okay.
But things in society have probably changed a
Yeah.
lot. I mean, now a lot of people,
so
both
true, Nicole.
couples have to work. The
Well,
context
exactly.
just keeps on changing,
It does.
and everything keeps on changing.
It
doesn't
does.
it?
Yeah,
it
it
does
does.
all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you support women that come back to a scenario where the pressure's on, no one's giving them extra support?
Low
even though-
confidence.
Yeah, there's almost a
Yeah.
lip service to we are, but in
Yeah.
actual fact we're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they both spoke really strongly this morning about the boundaries.
Yeah.
And that's a really big part about what we do. Know your non-negotiables before you even go back in.
Mm-hmm.
So, and prepare for that. Don't do that on day one. Prepare a few weeks ahead, which is why we definitely catch up with all our clients before they even walk through those doors again to say, well, what are the absolute non-negotiables at the start? But then also working with that to know that those can change. So you don't want to go in so structured that there's no movement, but you want to go in with the acknowledgement if there are some base non-negotiables, how do I work around that?
Mm-hmm.
And Ev mentioned, you know, work from home day can be a godsend to a lot of people. And certainly, you know, with yesterday being flexible work day, was it the day before?
Day before.
Day before,
Yeah.
You know, I think Australian workplaces are very much
Yeah.
moving in that direction. There's a lot of companies, we've seen a vast movement in that space in the last 5 years.
I think it's a great point though, Jess, the
Yeah.
important role that flexible work practices play in Australian workplaces today.
Well, Ev talked about just wanting to pick her child up from childcare to feel connected and to see who's actually spending 8
Yeah,
hours
who's
a
looking
day
after my kids?
with
Yeah.
her kids, you know. And that's very simple, isn't it? One pickup a week, but that made her feel
Connected.
connected.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that lasts even into the school transition. I think it's so vital for people who are facing that next of just meeting those other parents at least once a week, making the effort to be
Yeah.
or getting your workplace to agree that you can do a school pickup.
It's just those non-negotiables that
Yeah.
And how is Australia comparing to other countries in terms of adapting to needing to be flexible? Are we getting better at this?
I actually think we're tracking pretty well, Australia.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, there's been really good social policy and good legislation. Unfortunately, a lot of organisations don't always know about all this good social policy, so I think there's an important need to sort of bridge some of that knowledge gap. Even things like the long service leave changes that were made last year in Victoria are really helping working parents because they can take their long service leave one day at a time.
Yeah.
So when they might have run out of, you know, let's just say leave, particularly when they come back and the kids are really sick in childcare,
Yeah.
they might not have any more leave up their sleeve. They might be able to then tap into some long service leave days, you know. So I actually think Australia is actually tracking pretty well. But I mean, we've still got a long way to go.
Do people even know about these things?
A lot of people don't,
Not
Nicole.
enough.
No.
Not enough.
No.
So many companies don't know about keep in touch days either.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or what flexibility can look like, you know. It's so different, and that's why trial periods, I think, you know, that came through again in the interviews, is just trialing stuff. You know, the first time you might try something and that might not work, and that's okay. You know, so actually putting in place with your manager a trial, 3-month period, for example, can actually be a really great plan.
And just having that conversation. Like a client of mine the other day told me of a company that have made this dial-in meetings. If one person dials in, everybody's dialing in. Because some of the challenges that our women face is they say, okay, well, I can work from home and I dial in, but then I feel like I don't have a voice in that meeting. And so this company has said, well, let's trial this, we'll see how we go.
Yeah.
But even if you're sitting at your desk, it'll be a dial-in meeting. So it's just... I
Put
think it's
everyone on the
about
same
being-
playing field.
Yep.
Interesting.
Being creative, because this is just a work in progress.
Yeah.
I think we're all, the onus is on all of us in
To
how
adapt
to
and
be
support.
creative and open to try new things. And if it doesn't work, so we'll try something else.
Yeah.
Do you reckon there's even power just in that term, transition? Like when you sit down with a mum for the first time and you talk about, you're going through this transition and it goes through these phases and there's suddenly a name to the experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just,
Very powerful.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when
Yeah.
people understand that transition and the challenging nature of it. You know, because
Yeah.
we go, if you think about it, you go from what you know,
Yeah.
and we're creatures of habit, to something that we don't know at all, and in the middle is where the challenge sits. So yeah, I think it can be very helpful for people.
And because of the rocky nature of that, we're very much about, well, what can we give you if you think of it as being navigating uncharted waters on a bit of a ship? What mast can we give you to hold on to so that you've got some stability in this?
So not every woman or dad has access to
amazing services like yours. So what would you say to those parents who are needing to navigate these waters on their own?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah.
I think make sure they're aware of the supports that are available in their organisation. So often, again, there's many supports available, but people don't know about it. So, once they perhaps announce that they're pregnant, make sure they actually go and find out what policies and practices. Often they just sit on the intranet and nobody really understands the full extent. So that would be one.
Yeah, and I would say even if you don't have a buddy system or a mentor system within your organisation, talk to people who've been in those shoes before. So, often people walk in looking like things are perfect. I think Evan Rowe both alluded to that. And, you don't know that everybody has something. And, the more we open up the conversation, the better we'll be. Yeah.
And know you're going through a transition. This is a major change, and it's going to
That's right.
affect you in so many ways.
Yeah.
Being kind to yourself is the biggest thing. That self-compassion is huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
And being prepared that having lots of balls in the air is an ongoing thing, and it doesn't come necessarily to an end as we keep on adjusting. That's been another.
And I like to add to that one, and they're not made of glass. So if they're sitting on the floor, they're okay. And I often say to Sarah, I have so many clients who go, but I just want to pick it up. I just want to pick it up. And they actually, literally, it's like that. And I say, that one's okay on the floor for now. It's not made of glass. It's not going to break.
Yeah.
So are you guys living by your values?
Well, I think I can identify with Roe, actually.
Okay.
It's a work in progress. And I think...
What are we, the cobbler with no shoes often?
Yeah.
Look, I think we're both attest to the fact that small business has its own challenges too, and so the juggle for us is a bit different, I guess, not having a lot of the resources of large organisations and having to wear the many hats that we wear on a day-to-day basis. But the best thing for me is having you accountable to many days on 10 o'clock phone calls we're like, what happened to those boundaries?
Yeah.
But I think it comes back to at what cost, doesn't it? And we always talk about the Tombstone test, when we're at the end of our lives and we look back, are we going to wish that we'd worked harder, or are we going to wish that we'd spent more time with the kids, or being a bit more true to our non-negotiables? So I know that's something that we always really hold tight to, at the end of the day, and come back to.
But for us transitioning well, also both of us feel this way, that it's such a passion and we're making a difference to women on a daily basis, that there's nothing more than wanting that. I think when we started it 7 years ago, that was literally the dream was if we can make a difference. And things like our new digital product and ways that we're getting it out there now to know that it's actually being heard. That's what drives us every day.
And becoming more accessible every day.
And we keep hearing the non-negotiables. Roe and Ev talked about that. You guys have talked about these. It's not always easy to identify your non-negotiables, is it? Or there's pressures from external. It's kind of like the values thing. Sometimes are they my values or are they someone else's values?
And they change.
And they change. So again, like for mums watching, any tips on how to identify those and stick with them?
I think you have to know them. You have to know what your values are.
So
that's the cornerstone of your non-negotiables.
Okay.
So actually be able to stop and go, well, at this stage of my life, in this season, what is most important to me? And how you answer that question is, what are my values?
And what are my partner's values, if you have one? I think that's such a core piece where both of them, I think, did speak a bit about identity and the roles at home. Often this is a really important time to stop and say, what actually are both our roles? What are our responsibilities? How are we going to both parent in this, no matter what, so that you can move ahead with that plan in place? Because if your values are inherently different from your partner's, you're probably going to have some conflict there. And any psychologist will tell you that, marital troubles start with the birth of the first child. So that's a really important piece outside of the workplace and all the other juggle, is just that, healthy relationships come into this at a big time.
Thank you. That's really powerful, I think, for our viewers. And we're kind of touching on the role of dads now, and you guys are doing some space in that work too. So do you want to tell us about that exciting stuff?
I think it's really exciting, the dad stuff, because there's so much room to move in this space and so much need. I mean, you asked before about how we're tracking on flexibility, and I guess just in answer to both of those questions is with the dad stuff, I don't think not so great. So if you look at the uptake of flexibility, women are uptaking it about twice as twice as much as what men are. A lot of men don't even know, for example, that they can access the right to request flexibility. They just don't understand what their rights are around that, and there's still a lot of stigma. So in answer to your question, so what are we doing? We're trying to increase education and trying to support men to really equip them with the tools and the knowledge to be able to know what's possible, what the new normal looks like. You know, we're in shifting territory here, and there's not a lot of examples that have gone before for men to turn to, and so we're creating these new role models, and it's a great time for men to sort of say, well, what sort of working father, or what father do I want to be? Not what my father was or what I've seen, but what's that new role of working father? What can it look like?
Because it's not only in relation to the workplace that things are changing so much for dads, it's their role in fathering, isn't it? It's everything is changing.
Everything.
It is. There are no role models, and I think that causes a lot of stress for fathers who are having to feel like they've got to be the providers. They've got all that history about that behind them and that expectation, but also they've got to be, 50-50 and we're doing this together, it's an equal team. It's very hard, and I think we certainly see a lot of stress on dads that probably wasn't there before, and it's but it is also an opportunity, isn't it, to define as a team of parents what you want that to look like and what your options are.
Absolutely, but I think there are many men, just speaking really vulnerably, that are really struggling. Who are really caught in that. They're not okay. They're like, I can't sustain this. This is just too much. So I think it is really important, going back to the perinatal piece, to know the difference between that dad stress and de-stress, and helping guys to be able to answer that question and get the help that they need early. And that's why the work that you're doing at COPE has been so important, Nicole, is, that Ready to Cope for men is so critical, that they get that information at the right time so that they can normalise it and know when things maybe are not going so well, and then where to go for help.
Well, it's been a fantastic overview and discussion around this really important issue, and thanks for your great professional insights, bringing together the stories that we've heard today and bringing it into this important context that is really, people are struggling out there, and it's great to hear that there's great things happening, but there's more to do, and we're all working together. And we'll all work together and continue to educate mums and dads out there and let people know about their options, and that they're not alone in the struggle of the juggle.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking with us on the Mum Drum.
Thanks for having us.
So thanks again for watching the Mum Drum. There are so many issues and opportunities across those 3 phases that so many mums will have never even thought about, particularly things like the keeping in touch strategy and how to maintain your boundaries.
So hopefully you've picked up some tips today that will help you go from being a working person to a working mum. Thanks again for watching, and take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time on the Mum Drum.
See you next time.